All right, folks, welcome to another episode of Chapter 2. On this show, I'm delighted to have Manu Kapur join us, who's the author of Productive Failure. And this is a sort of book that's been brought to my attention. Actually, we have the same book agent, Esmond, who's super fun and is always recommending great authors who's also worked with him in the past. So, really happy to have you on, Manu, first of all, to share your experience and what inspired you to write the book and so forth. So, for many people who dial into the show, they always want to know what's the big idea behind the book, what inspired you to write it, and tell us more.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure. Yeah, so the big idea behind the book really is that, for the longest time, there's been conversations around, failure can be good for learning. Failure, when it happens, we should embrace it, we should try to learn from it, and so on and so forth. And all that is good, but this book is not just another conversation around failure. The way I like to think about this and the work that I've done is to take the conversation one step further and say, if failure can be powerful for learning, then we shouldn't wait for it to happen. We should intentionally design for it. So, what does that design look like? We should design for it in a safe way. What is the science behind it? Can we do it in a safe and curated way so that people learn through failure? And then, because of that, they learn deeper so that when failure actually matters, like when the stakes are high, because they've learned things deeply, the likelihood of failure is reduced. And that's the big idea, is how do you use failure intentionally and deliberately in a safe way when you're first learning something new, so that you learn it in a way that when it counts, failure is reduced. That is what productive failure is.
Yeah, no, I love this idea. I like you say, many people talk about failing or failing fast, or but for me, I think it's really important this idea of, as you're saying, designing for failure to happen. Like we're building these more and more complex systems. It's impossible to know or predict how they will behave. So thinking from the outset that you should expect failure or design systems to respond to unintended consequences, I think it's a really important idea, whether you're building technology systems or whether you're just trying something new for the first time. One of the things in Unlearn we talk a lot about is thinking big and starting small, because the power of small is great. It's like gives you small as like a small step, so you get a fast feedback loop. You're taking a sort of smaller risk, whether that's an economic risk, you pay a little money to learn if it works or not. But it also protects people a little bit, I think, as well, where it's easier to make small mistakes and recover from those, where people don't feel like they're putting their entire identity on the line.
Right.
So what were some of the sort of examples from your own experience that, where you've had to have productive failures? Like what were some of the things that sort of struck you from as your own sort of journey in work?
Yeah, look, I started out, wanting to become a professional soccer player, and I played football for a number of years. And one of the things that stood out was, as I look back, at the time I didn't like it so much, but as I look back, our training philosophy was, that my coach's philosophy was, you push to the limit. You do your push-ups, pull-ups, running, etc. You push to the limit when you really can't do it anymore, and then you push a little bit more in a safe way. And the idea was, the good things actually happen on the other side of failure. The idea that it's in that space, provided it's safe and you don't injure yourself, that's when your mental and physical kind of couple in a way that you can really have strong growth and development. And if you look at and my coach used to say, if you look at the tough matches, they almost always won in that zone where everybody can play for 80 minutes. It's the last 10. And that's what makes the difference. Of course, training like that was hard, but that was one of the looking back, that was one of the starting points of, you really need to take a system almost to failure in a safe way, and then allow it to sort of recover, adapt, and grow. And that's when it becomes really strong. And you see similar dynamics. I mean, you talked about complex systems. You see similar dynamics play out in a number of complex systems, including our own biology, evolution, psychotherapy, and so on and so forth. And I've just brought this over my journey into human cognition and learning, because the idea of using failure as the starting point was completely unheard of. right? And so if you don't know something, if you're trying to learn a new concept or an idea, the dominant paradigm, even today, is, well, let me just tell you exactly what it is. I will explain it to you very clearly, give you lots of examples so that you understand them, and then you can apply that, right? That's the logic. If you don't know something, let me tell you. The idea that I should start with somehow creating problem-solving activities where you act, which are intentionally designed for you to fail, and then learn something new, is just completely counterintuitive. But that's exactly what we did, and showed that it was much more productive for learning.
And give me an example. Tell me a little bit of it. Like, what are some of these scenarios that you're creating for people in maybe a business context where, you're sort of injecting failure into the experiment with them.
Yeah, so in the business context, I try to make a distinction between the learning space and the performance space. So if you're at work, there are certain things that are key deliverables where there's no room for failure. These are skills and capabilities you already have, and you've got to deliver on them, right? No, no, this is your performance space. You know this very well, and you need to do this. But what people often don't talk about is this learning space. What is my learning space at work? Actually, just in life as well. What is my learning space? This is a space where, by definition, you should be taking on tasks or challenges that are beyond your current skill sets and abilities. And therefore, by definition, you will struggle. You might not get things right. But this is precisely the zone where learning and growth happens, right? So taking on a new project that is beyond your skills and abilities, marshaling across interdisciplinary team of people towards a certain, designing a new product feature or something, or integrating AI into your systems and processes. All of these things could be, as long as, whatever this thing is, as long as it's beyond your current skill sets and capabilities, you're in that learning space. And if it can be communicated very clearly to your teams, to your employees, that look, we understand this is the learning space, you will struggle, but we are here to support and help you grow. And that creates a very different kind of a dynamic within an organization, within a unit, where it's not just about performance, but you're looking after your team and your people's growth and learning over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really great distinction, because probably most of where I've definitely improved is doing things that were uncomfortable and unknown to me in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was going to fail, right? But, there was moments where I had good leadership or people around me who were there to support me. I still remember one of the first times in our venture studio, we were running a crowdfunding campaign. I had
Mm-hmm.
never run a crowdfunding campaign in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to manage and gain influencers to be part of this crowdfunding campaign. And it was funny, one of the first things I had to say to the team is like, I don't know how to do this. Um, I'm not sure it's going to work, which most of them laughed and were sort of like, that's okay. We sort of expect that, Barry. This is going to be a learning zone for all of us in a way in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll get through it together, And that was one of a huge sort of relief off my shoulders, if you will, because maybe in some respect I had this expectation that my team are looking at it from a performance lens in the beginning, but yet, by openly sharing that where I was at, my mindset,
Mm-hmm.
it became a learning space initially that we could turn into a performance space over time. So yeah, I really like that example that you're
Yeah.
sharing.
And well, the features of that learning space, which naturally happened in the conversation you had with your team, is that you guys set up a psychologically safe space. So this whole idea of psychological safety kind of is important to build into this learning space.
So the point of the show is obviously getting this a grasp of the big idea behind the book,
Mm.
which is this idea of productive failure, which you shared with us. But the fun part for me is always thinking big and then going very narrow, right?
Yeah.
And like diving into sort of one of the chapters in the book. So,
Mm.
what is your favorite chapter? I think I always love asking authors this because often when they write the book, maybe people fall in love with chapter 8 or chapter 7, or they only ask you questions about designing these things. So, what was your favorite chapter, and which one do you want to dive into?
Well, I think for me, the favorite chapter was writing about chapter two itself, where I kind of describe how I came to the notion, how I came to the idea both from practice as well as a doctoral student, and then how I developed the initial sets of experiments and what I found, and so on and so forth. The rest of the chapter, the part two of the book, that goes into the science behind it, and I'm happy to talk about that too. And the last part of the book is really about, okay, if you understand what it is and why it works, the science, how do you design for it? So what do you do? But my favorite would still be the starting point, that which is the chapter two.
Great. Well, the show's called Chapter Two. Very rarely do people pick Chapter Two when we dive. So tell us more about it, and your inspiration for it.
Yeah, so just before I started my PhD, I was a math teacher, and I taught math, and my teaching philosophy was pretty much how I described it earlier. If you don't know something, if my students don't know something, well, I'll explain it to you very clearly. Even students, found my lectures very engaging, very clear. If you ask them after, like, did you understand what I was talking about? And say, yes, we do understand, and everything was fine, except when you probe their understanding. Like, they could do all the problems or the kinds of problems that you covered in the lecture, but if you change a little bit, something, they were completely thrown off. And this happened time and time again, and to the point where I was wondering, why is it that they were not seeing what I was trying to show them? It's like, I've put in so much effort into clearly explaining what the concepts are. They can do something with it, but they can't seem to deeply understand that they can transfer it to novel. You just had to change a little bit, and they were completely thrown off. Turned out that this was a phenomenon that was well established in the research literature as well. People have gone into classrooms that are very well taught, right? And both students and teachers would tell you that this is a very good lecture on mathematics or something. Yet, when you probe understandings, students' understanding are invariably found to be shallow. So why is that? And early on in my doctoral thesis, I realized that the problem of learning, of initial learning from lectures, which are the dominant ways of learning, is not that we learn poorly from bad lectures. Of course, we learn poorly from bad lectures. The problem of learning is that we learn poorly from even very good ones, right? And that just changed my mindset. Like, wow, so if you're learning badly or poorly, or at least it's an illusion of learning, and we only learn in a shallow manner from even very good lectures, why is that? Right? And that brought me into the literature on, if you want to understand something deeply, you need to be able to see what is critical in a concept. And so the idea of seeing came into the picture. And what do I mean by that? You can't understand something if you don't see it. So, if you're watching a movie or watching a piece of art or looking at a math proof or a science experiment, in the same stimulus, perceptual stimulus, an expert and novice are going to see very different things. It's right in front of you. It's very engaging, very clear, but an expert would see deep features, critical features, the underlying structure. A novice is more likely to see the superficial aspects of the phenomena. Right? No matter how well you have prepared this perceptual stimulus, because seeing, again, another epiphany I had in my doctoral studies, is seeing is not just a perceptual exercise, it's a cognitive one. You see things because you have knowledge to see things, right? And so in a learning situation, that creates a bit of a paradox. You need a learner to understand a new idea deeply. You need to be able to see the deep structure. But by definition, a novice does not have the knowledge to see the deep structure like an expert does. So no matter what an expert does to explain things very clearly, an expert is still assuming that a novice is seeing the same things as they are in their own beautiful, engaging presentation.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating when you share it in that manner. A few things instantly run through my mind. I think of our education system,
Mm-hmm.
as a way where information is shared and you're tested on regurgitating the
Mm-hmm.
information rather than actually applicability of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of just was one thought that was running through my mind as you were sharing that. And then I've thought about in my own experience where I've actually learned the most. And often in my world of software development, a lot of it comes from I can talk to you about what a product is,
Mm-hmm.
how it would work, its design, its features.
Mm-hmm.
But until you either create it through a prototype
Mm-hmm.
or somebody uses it in a tactile manner,
Mm-hmm.
their context is always lacking, as you said, and that's one of the things that strikes me right away.
I lost you for a bit. Are you there?
Oh, so how do you help people learn this sort of go from the information to the sort of tactile aspect?
Yeah, and it all comes down to this. First, it starts with the seeing aspect, and once you realize that you can't just, if you just tell people what it is, that they're not going to be able to see the deep structure. The first job of designing a learning environment for somebody is actually not to tell them what it is, but to actually prepare them to see. So, what does that preparation for seeing looks like? And it turns out failure is a very good way to help people see. What do I mean? If you're about to learn a concept or a new idea, if I can design problem solving activities which are designed in a way that they're intuitive, that means you can generate some ideas and solutions, but they're also designed in a way that your ideas and solutions are not going to work. So you have a task, you try three, four, five different things, none of them really work. They are what you try is relevant, yeah, because your prior knowledge, it's relevant to the task, but it's not sufficient to be able to solve that task. Now, once you're in that state, that's what helps you then see if an expert then comes in and shows you how to solve that task, or what is the underlying idea that was necessary for you to be able to solve that task. In that contrast between what you tried and what the expert strategies were, it's that contrast that helps you then see, oh, I was doing it this way. Now I see. Literally, people use that language. I see what you, I see why I was wrong or suboptimal. I see how this formulation actually helps solve the problem in a quite a nice way. And I think that's the failure is actually a necessary condition. Lacking knowledge, if as a novice, if you don't have the knowledge, deliberately activating failed strategies or failed solutions actually prepares the novice to see from an expert.
Yeah, I think, again, what resonates here and goes through my mind instantly is like simulations, you know, um, these ideas of like putting yourself in environments or situations where, you're asked to do a task that you sort of know is not going to work out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's what gives you these aha moments,
Mm-hmm.
my earliest life was actually in mobile game development. And one of the things that always fascinated me about games is that it's a simulated environment where you're teaching people new skills, right? So if you're playing Super Mario, level one, you learn how to jump. Level two, you learn how to jump and do another task. So you're stacking these skills, right? That it's a low stakes environment, if you will, for them to iterate and practice and make mistakes and grow their expertise.
Yeah.
And it's always stuck with me and as a way of learning, and to hear you sort of share that as an important part is kind of fascinating too as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, it can happen in a number of contexts. Gaming is a perfect example. Product development is another example, or just simply learning something new. Yeah.
So, to get started, what are some of the tips that you would have for people then, as they, if they want to sort of, if you will, have more productive failure in their life,
Mm-hmm.
how can they get started with that, and what are some of the tips that you would share with them?
I think one of the first things is just an awareness of this idea. Not many people even have this awareness. What it means, how do you know that you're in the learning zone, for example, right? So if you're trying to do something or learn something, and if you're given a task and you can do it successfully, you're not in the learning zone. If you're given a harder task still, and you are able to do it, you're still not in the learning zone. It has to be at a level of difficulty or a challenge which is, like I said, beyond your skill set and abilities. And failure is the only thing that gives you a signal that you have now entered the learning zone, right? So if you're interested in designing for somebody else's learning or your own learning, you've got to learn how to identify when you're in the failure zone. And you need to be able to enter it, right? And only, like I said, only a failure can give you a signal that you've just entered. And then the next big thing that has to happen is you've got to norm it. Because people start to think, if I'm struggling, if I'm not getting it right, there's something wrong with me. Well, in the learning zone, nothing is wrong with you. That is the norm. Because by definition, you're in that zone where you will struggle. So norming that for yourself and for other people, and telling yourself that, look, this is how I should expect it to be, is the mindset shift that needs to take place, so that people can persist through that. Because we've seen like how people go through a roller coaster of emotions when they are in that zone, right? And sometimes these emotions can drag them down, and other times you can learn to deal with these emotions and use them productively, because emotionally charged situations can go both ways, right? And depending on how you attach meaning to those emotions. So we found, for example, together with my student, doctoral students, like negative emotions that you might feel in that learning zone can actually be positively correlated with learning outcomes. And not all positive emotions are correlated positively with learning outcomes. So this emotional dynamics is really interesting as you persist in that. And it's kind of changing our view of, what are the underlying mechanisms by which we learn in the learning zone. And people need to know that, because we are so accustomed to attaching negative things to all negative emotions and negative experiences. No, sometimes in a safe space, they can be really good. Once we have this kind of an orientation and a mindset to enter the learning zone and norm our sets of expectations and effort, then I think you can start with the design, right? And with the design guidelines. So how do you design these tasks? How do you design these activities? And those are some of the things that the design framework I present in the last two chapters of the book.
Great. Well, Manu, thank you very much for being on the show and sharing the stories with us. Everybody out there, go check out the book, Productive Failure, Unlocking Deeper Learning Through the Science of Failing. Manu, fantastic book. Thank you very much for sharing it with the audience. And, I hope everybody goes out there, grabs a copy, follows you on LinkedIn and all other good news and social channels. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you, Barry. Loved it. Thank you for having me on the show. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. Did I go all right?
That went great. Yeah, just hang on 2 seconds.